Well, hello. So I wanted to start this video with a bit of a preface. So I'm going to be talking about my experience going through the dark night of the soul. And before I get into my story and my journey and where I've come from to kind of where I am and what my viewpoint is and how things shifted through my life, how the paradigm of my life shifted very drastically, I wanted to touch base first and try to answer the question of what is a dark night of the soul? What does that even mean? A lot of people will give you there's different definitions. A lot of people will give you kind of their own perspective, maybe through their own personal point of view, their own dark night of the soul journey, or through some kind of traumatic event that happened in their life. It's important to note that a dark night of the soul is typically spiritual in nature, but doesn't necessarily have to be, although it usually is spiritual. It could also be something where it's a bit more physical or emotional or psychological, although usually it's all just kind of wrapped up into this overarching drastic shift or change of paradigm in your worldview. That'd be a good way to put it. So, what is a dark night of the soul? Essentially, a dark night of the soul is when you lose really all sense of self, all sense of your value system, your morals, your ethics, your spiritual beliefs, your religion. It could also be in terms of your value system, like maybe you believe something in terms of like if you work hard in life, you'll become successful, and then that worldview gets shattered because then you realize that all your jobs or ways to success are just through social connection and kind of fake it till you make it, and it's who you know, and it's not really like your accolades stuff. So like there's different aspects of how a dark night of the soul can sort of come into your life. So that's what I mean, where it may not necessarily always be spiritual, but I believe it is always spiritual. There's a caveat in that statement, but it could be a little bit of it could be compartmentalized to like different areas of life, right? Okay. So a dark night of the soul is when it's an ego death is sort of the blanket term to apply there. It's a death of the ego. It's a death of self. You lose your sense of self. You lose your sense of your reality, really. You lose your sense of everything you've come to know becoming shattered and destroyed, and you lose it all. Uh, it's not the most pretty experience, I'll tell you that much. It is very difficult to go through. A lot of people, what will bring a dark night of the soul into one's life will be something like a traumatic event or a drastic shift or change, like maybe a death of a loved one, relationship ending. You have to move across the country because of some circumstance. Find it, you could become homeless. Uh, There's a lot of sort of uh, trauma that is kind of used as like the catalyst to a dark night of the soul. A lot of times you'll hear about some traumatic event. And what a dark night of the soul ultimately usually will lead you into is a spiritual awakening. Okay, so you go through a dark night of the soul, you have an ego death, your world gets shattered, and then you have a spiritual awakening. So you awaken to newfound truths and values and spirituality. You tend to expand your point of view. Your vib On a spiritual level, it's like your vibrational sort of field or energy level will expand and become higher. Okay, you shed off these lower vibrational, I guess, values or ways of thinking or operating in the denser lower energies. Okay, I know that sounds a little bit out there for some people, but that's what it okay, that's what it is. And you essentially step into a higher sense of self. You connect with the higher self, which is another something else I can get into later. But just know that you are connecting with you are getting closer to the real version of who you are in eternity. That's the way I'll put it, through shedding of the ego, and you are headed towards spiritual enlightenment, or at least you are opening the doorway toward that direction through a dark night of the soul into spiritual awakening. So with a dark night of the soul, what happens is that once your entire worldview just shatters before you, you're left feeling empty. You're at such a loss. It is so drastic and so really destructive to who you are, your sense of I, your sense of me, what you believed up until that point in your life, everything you hold dear, like all your value systems, all your your religion, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're an atheist, whatever your belief system is, if you're a Democrat, Republican, if you're even could come down to like your hobbies, or like if you're big into sports and us versus them mentalities and things like that that start to get shed away, and you move on from these lower, I call them lower vibrational frequencies, or lower vibrational ways of like living in this denser lower energy. You're shedding that off, and so you're rising up kind of out of that. Okay, and so through a dark night of the soul, you come more into contact, or more into the reality of who you really are, and your vibrational frequency will elevate, and you connect to the higher self more closely, more intimately is a good way to put it. And once you go through it and you get to the other side, first of all, you don't realize, at least for your first major dark night of the soul, you don't even realize that's what it is. You just think it's a period of like deep depression and sadness and struggle, and you think it could be, is it just some psychological episode? Do I need a therapist? Like, how do I get out of this? What do I do to solve this problem? Why can't I feel any better? Why is every day just so depressing and empty, and I feel like nothing? And what what why can't I get that like joy back into my life? Like, what is going on? I'm trying to leave this as a preface. I'm not trying to be specific about my experience. I'm trying to just give some background of what a dark night of soul is, what people generally deal with and go through. I will touch on like what I specifically went through after. Um, but that's a lot of it. And a lot of it is trying to like understand how to make sense of things again, because a lot of things don't make sense anymore. And you're kind of just like floating through during this time. You're kind of just like going through the motions, but you don't really understand why sometimes anymore. You're getting up, you're going to work, you're eating food, you're drinking your coffee, you're whatever, you're maybe, if you're big into exercise, you're going for your daily jog outside or whatever, and you're still doing these things, but you feel so detached from them. It's kind of like you're the perceiver, or the view, you're like outside of yourself, just watching yourself do these things, and you're like, okay, why am I guess I just do this just because that's what I normally do, and that's what I've always done, and so on. But internally, there's this emptiness, there's this empty space inside, and you are basically like, think of it like a Coke can or a soda bottle gets emptied out, and now there's nothing there, right? There used to be all this soda, and then you just emptied it out, and now it's empty inside. So when you go through a dark night of the soul, that's what it is that your ego is emptied out, and it's gone, and there's nothing there. It is gone completely. Okay. And a lot of times there are people that will commit suicide during a dark night of the soul. It's very unfortunate because it is a lot of depression does come with a dark night of the soul. I remember I personally I will touch on I'm gonna come on cam and like talk directly. I'm just doing this as a preface. I'm probably gonna have some video. Maybe I'll show like a quote of what a dark night of the soul is to kind of as a abstract to what I'm saying, and then after I'm gonna come and share my story personally. But I just want to give this sort of back preface because I think it's very important because a lot of people won't even understand what this even means. And I know that I'm gonna put this on my main YouTube channel, and like some folks out there probably not even gonna don't even know this side of me. I don't even really talk about it uh, too much. I don't even really talk about it too much with people or that know like about this stuff, or I kind of keep it. I've kind of kept this to myself by and large. Um, so a lot of people will struggle big time during this period of their life. It is a period of struggle, that is for sure. I remember I was taking like, what is it, 5-HTP pills, trying to like help stimulate like good feelings and in my brain and like to fight off the negative feelings. I was like trying to find ways to like feel better. I remember I would scream like I had a pillow and I would just go in the basement and just scream into it to feel something. I'm like, I want to feel something. Like, where is I don't feel anything. Like, what is happening? Like, where are my emotions? Like, what happened? And then I would try to like find these strategies of like different things I would look up, like how to feel better, how to are you just depressed? And you go through all this Google searching and YouTube videos, and you're trying to like make sense of it all. And in retrospect, when you come out of it, and then you understand what that episode or that part of your life is, it all makes sense. And I didn't like and the reason why you can know it's a dark night of the soul, and why you can know it's an ego death, and why it is what, like, it was a spiritual journey and sort of like a spiritual disassembly of the higher self in yourself, the inner self, or however you want to say it, connecting and kind of breaking through that ego death, is that in retrospect, when you look into this and you discover what it is, and then it gets explained to you, and you go, like a light bulb in your head goes off, and you go, hey, wait a minute, that's what happened to me. What these other people are talking about, their testimony, or what people are expressing. Like, at first, for myself, I didn't even look into like Dark Night of the Soul. I didn't even know what was happening. Again, like, I was just dealing with this. I was like, what is this? I don't understand. And I didn't really fully understand until probably about like a good couple years after the fact. And then it finally like made sense to me, and I was able to find like the information that explained what that was, why it happened. And so there's folks that probably go through dark nights of the soul without even knowing that they went through a dark night of the soul, even if they came out all right, and they changed their perception of life. Like, I'm sure there are folks that are still a bit ignorant, because it's not necessarily that you'll figure out that, hey, I had a spiritual awakening. You might just be like, hey, I feel differently about things and my belief system's different. Or again, it could be a trauma or something that causes a change in your life that may or may not connect to as being quote unquote spiritual in nature. You may just see it as more of like, this is why I said originally at the beginning, you may see it as just being kind of like a preference change, or a series of like deductive logic reasoning, or something, that you came to some new conclusions about things you used to believe, and you're like, well, I'm no longer a Christian, now I'm, a new age, or now I'm an atheist, or now I'm this. And so, that I'm sure that can happen, but by and large, especially what's going on in the world today, is that there are more and more people, drastically way more people, going through spiritual awakening. Like, spiritual awakening is it's incredible how many people are going through through spiritual awakening. Uh, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to really get into those reasons, but I will just say that because I want to keep this centered on dark night of the soul. I don't want to go off into a million tangents, and I want to get into my journey. I just feel like I need to lay this baseline or this foundation because a lot of people are not going to even understand what I'm talking about or understand like what a dark night of the soul even is or why it's important. And if you haven't gone through a dark night of the soul, it's not going to really make sense to you, unfortunately. You could understand it conceptually. You can understand what I'm saying. You could be like, "Oh, okay," but some things it's just going to seem very foreign to you because and that makes sense because you're stuck in your paradigm and your ego and in your point of view and your likes, your dislikes, your journey through life up until this point, however old you are, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever. And if you haven't gone through a spiritual awakening just doesn't make sense because your paradigm is may or may not have world paradigm, worldview is probably never shifted drastically. Um, I do believe something I will say is kind of partially about myself is that I became a born again Christian when I was 17, and I think in a lot of ways I have mulled this over fairly recently actually, and I believe that coming into Christianity kind of out of the Catholic upbringing that I had and the religion, I actually do look back and see that as a bit of a spiritual awakening, or not maybe not necessarily like a dark night of the soul, but I think that was a necessary step to bring me to where I am today. So, because a lot of people when they go through spiritual awakenings, or they shed off religion, or they shed off like the older versions of things they believed, a lot of times people will tend to throw that all away instead of really reflecting on it and understanding the journey by and large. Because it's a journey, it's an eternal journey that we're going through. There's a fantastic quote, or a great way of putting it the other day that I saw that really falls in line with what I my perceptions are, is that you're not a human having experiencing consciousness. You're a consciousness having a human experience. Because the reality is that we are all eternal beings. We are eternal. Okay, regardless of whatever your religion tells you and what your beliefs are, there's like two truths that I'm absolutely sure of is one, we are eternal, and that our higher self is the true version of ourselves. And number two, we come back again and again through millennia and beyond of lifetimes, possibly forever and ever. That'll never stop. I'm not quite sure on that part. I'm not sure if there's a finality to like an end goal to all these journeys that we go through. Now, there are people that sort of like have the different perception on that. Like you'll have folks like my friend Joseph Cavallaro who encouraged me to do this, and he is more on the his path has led him through the Urantia book. Okay, and then you'll have folks on like the sort of more the New Age side, and there's just different perspectives on it. Like, and then there'd be people on the New Age side that also kind of pull from like Buddhism and like karma and karmic cycles, and where like you have to come back, lifetime over lifetime to like cleanse your karma, or like almost kind of quote unquote like repent for like negative karma and then do good karma, and then that eventually like allows you to stop the cycles or something. So I mean, like there's different things that people apply, and then Urantia says we go to like the mansion worlds after the earth, and then you go into millennia and into towards source closer and closer, and you go into all these like systems and that we're quarantined off on the earth. And I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. And whoever is wrong, whoever's right on that part of it, I don't think that's necessarily so important as just recognizing the journey in your personal life. And once you go through spiritual awakening and you start to come into this understanding that we all are one, and that source or God or spirit, whatever you want to call it, that there is an eternal sort of center or creator that is love. It's all love, and that we are all fragments of that God. We are all God. People don't like that term. That, oh, what do you mean you're God? No, well, no, we're all basically part of that eternal being. There's a awesome point or a way that somebody described this, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic because I never thought of it that way. And I was like, that's so interesting. So, you know, if you take God, okay, or the creator or the eternal source, think of it like this, right? So say you're an eternal being or you're God, right, quote unquote, and you're all knowing, you're omniscient, omnipotent, all powerful, everything, right? So you know everything that of course has happened in the past, you know everything that's happening in the present, you know everything that's going to happen, and you're always going to know everything, right? So you're sitting in eternity, you're doing your thing, you're chilling out as God, and you're like, well, I know that I'm going to do this next, and I know, 1,000 years from now, or time, whatever, you know that you're gonna do X, Y, Z. You already know all this. There's no surprise. You know everything you're gonna do because you're God. How boring would that get? How boring would that be? And so the way somebody explained it was that the reason that God, well, and also you can't learn anything new because you know everything. You can't grow. You can't evolve. You can't change. You can't become like a better version of yourself because you just are. You exist. And so the only reason to change that is, what if you take yourself or source and you break yourself up into a million or billions or trillions of different little pieces of yourself, right? Now, myself, Matthew, and I'll use my friend Joseph, I don't know what Joseph's going to do. I don't know if he's going to decide to take the chocolate cake or the vanilla cake at the party. Which one does he prefer? I don't know. Oh, he likes the chocolate cake. I'm surprised by that, or that's interesting. I didn't know he was going to take the chocolate cake. He had two choices. I didn't know what he was going to decide. Why? Because I'm not him. He's not me. And now there's this way to have understanding and learn and grow and surprise, and that you don't know everything. And so as God or source, I believe that's one of the major reasons why we are all from source, all, you know, pieces of the creator, is because that way you can have the unknown before you. And if you don't know what's going to happen, that creates interest, that creates intrigue, that creates an opportunity to grow, to learn, to develop, to change, to make mistakes, and to see what's going to happen, and to look forward to that because you don't know. And that's the only way that an eternal being could break off. So why is that important to the dark night of the soul? It's important because the higher self, which is like the true version of who you are, and the higher self is like knows everything that's going to happen and knows you and everything, which there's debates on like what the higher self really is, and it's all part of source. But I believe that, to me it seems like almost like a microcosm of source. So you have source broken off into trillions of different parts of itself. Then you have like the higher self, and then the higher self will break off into having incarnations like myself, and then there's maybe different higher selves out there for different, like, be parts of source or something. That part, a little bit fuzzy. I'm not exactly sure on that end, but I just know that, there's the higher self. But it's important because when we go through a dark night of the soul, we are basically opening ourselves up to getting closer to source and closer to that eternal love. And we're walking in that direction. And the reason why it's important to understand the baseline of what source is or what God is to have that connection, to realize that when you go through a dark night of the soul, you eventually, in my opinion, this is really the journey, is that you go through a dark night of the soul into spiritual awakening, and then you will deal with a concept called non-duality, which is something I still am learning about, and then you reach spiritual enlightenment. Okay, so there's sort of like three components to that, and you may or may not get to non-duality or spiritual enlightenment. It depends. Like you may have to go through several dark nights of the soul, or you'll get to like the next step, and then you'll kind of come back and go through a dark night of the soul to shed off more ego and more. But the key to shedding ego, the key to shedding, is to shed the sense of self and to let go of that duality point of view. Us versus them. Me and you. Instead of me and you, it's just I could be you, you could be me, and understanding that. And then you get into spiritual enlightenment where you are essentially detached from ego entirely. And there's just no ego anymore. There's just being. You just are. And then that's the goal. That's the journey, is to get to that point, to come into peace, into harmony with the higher self, with source, with God, with spirit, and to let go of all these preconceived notions and the sort of like the lower, denser vibrational realities that people live in and function in that are not helpful. Or I don't want to say not helpful, but really you have to graduate out of, is a good way to put it. I know this is very long-winded, um, but I'm recording this also separately, and I'll just edit these videos together. I'm probably not going to do this in the same day. Because I still want to think about how to sort of approach my journey. I want to keep it as structured as I can. I tend to be very long-winded. I tend to go off into different tangents. That's why I'm trying to keep things chill as much as I can. But I feel like if I don't talk about this, then people are gonna either be confused or they won't really understand like where I'm coming from and why it matters. And with a dark night of the soul, and going through one personally, I can tell you that it's very, very life-changing. It is life-shattering. Your viewpoint's gonna change. Your viewpoints just completely change. There's still like a lot of people think though when they hear about this is something I gotta say too, is that when you have these spiritual changes or a spiritual awakening, people think of all this like weird like um spiritual woo woo and like, oh, like you become this like monk and like you no longer like you, and like no, that's not true. Like it's not this outlandish kind of crazy thing that people like to ascribe to it. um it's very practical. It's something really wild that I learned, is that it's a lot more practical and simplistic and easy to understand than I thought it would be, or than I kind of like that I really realized, like maybe before, is like when I was a Christian, there were different like spiritual concepts that would make like seem like they were all out there and crazy and weird and like untouchable, and it's like, no, not really. It's a lot easier it's a lot easier pill to swallow once you go through a spiritual awakening. You kind of just realize it's really just another version of three living in the 3D reality that we are, and it's just understanding that, hey, there's a higher dimensions, there's your higher self, there's a 4D and 5D reality, and so on and so forth, and that it's really just it's simplistic and it's easy to grasp, and you come to an understanding that really it's just higher concepts, but they're structured, there's logic to them, like they're very, it mirrors the 3D in a lot of ways, I would say, but also it's just like think of it like a good way to put it would be like, think in our reality humans can't fly, right? So we walk around on the ground. But then think of like the next step up, like into the 4D would be like now humans could fly without wings, in the 4D reality, but all the other things that we can do, like walk and run and skip, that we can do in the 3D, all still applies. But now you just add a layer to it of like, no, now we can fly, which we can't do in the 3D, but now in the 4D we can fly, and that's all you're doing. It's just another layer of reality. You're just adding to it. And then in the 5D, it's like, oh, we can fly, and then we can think consciously that we want to go from, like, I'm here in the United States and I want to go to Japan. Then I could just think it, and then I can just be there like instantly, like teleporting. Like, okay, now you add that layer. Like, that's a good way to put it, is that like, and I'm using like human ability, I guess, as an example, but that's all it really is. It's not like some, oh, crazy thing. It's like, oh, it doesn't make sense. No, it's just you're just limited in the 3D. That's really all it is. And in these other states of being, these higher states of being, you are able to just do things more freely, more easily, and but there's still like physics or laws of, I don't know, nature that govern these planes of existence. We don't really fully understand them because we don't exist in those uh, planes of reality in the 3D here in the Earth, but that's really all it is. So once you understand that it's structured, that there's sense to it, there's like a logic to it, it becomes a bit more easier to grasp and understand as well. Uh, but anyways, that's kind of like my TLDR, 30 minutes of spirituality 101 baseline, just to understand that, like, dark night of the soul, to recap, is an ego death that a person goes through, to where their worldview, their beliefs, their perceptions, their preconceived notions all get shattered, all get emptied out. You lose your sense of self, you lose your ego, you get thrown into rock bottom, and then from there, you have to reestablish yourself. And you come into new perceptions, new realities, new beliefs, new points of view, and you're still you. It's just a newer version of yourself. That's really it. Uh, I will get more into sort of the nuances of like my personal journey, what I dealt with, how this applied to my life directly in the next part. Uh, but for now, I think I'll leave it at that. Probably, that pretty much covers Dark Night of the Soul, I think, on a general, point of view, and like what the spiritual journey really is. All right.